Hey everybody, welcome back to homerecordingmadeeasy.com and here on my YouTube channel. And this week we're going to be picking up where we left off last week. This is part 2 of showing you how I start off a mix and how I prepare the session to start mixing in Studio One version 5. So if you missed last week's video, you'll be able to click the link in the description box below where I show you how I kind of start setting up the session. We're going to kind of continue on with this just so we can get ready to start mixing. So I want to help you along with that. So if you're someone who has Studio One version 5, or even if you have Studio One version 4 or Studio One version 3, even Studio One version 2.5, to be honest, all these things will apply. It'll just look, the screen will look a little bit different. So if you have any version of Studio One and you're new to Studio One, especially Studio One version 5, and you want to learn really quickly how to get up and running and go beyond what I'm going to do here on YouTube for you, I invite you to check out the PreSonus Studio One Beginner's Guide. It's brand new for year 2020. It's all done in the latest version, version 5, where I take you through from the time you install your software and walk you through every single setting, every single key component here on the screen so you can get up and running very, very quickly. This is at homerecordingmadeeasy.com. Now, I also want to give you a coupon code. So if you're interested in that training course, the PreSonus Studio One Beginner's Guide, I want to give you a coupon code. The coupon code is YouTube25. YouTube25 will take 25% off that course, and that'll go far deeper than where we are here today. And also, I have a whole range of Studio One specific training courses, so check it out at homerecordingmadeeasy.com. So here we are back in Studio One where we left off last week. So last week, in summary, I showed you how to import the audio files. I showed you how I organize my session, how I name the tracks, how I color code the section or the tracks, how I have my workflow set up, how we add buses, and how we route all of our audio or grouping of instruments to those buses. The next step, and where we're going to pick up this week, is I want to show you how we do some stuff here with the tracks here to get them ready before we start adding plugins and start mixing. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to close the browser here. I'm going to close the mixer, I should say, the console. Down here in the bottom right-hand corner, I'm going to hit the mix button, and that'll close that. Now, once again, we can come over here to this little box here and we can change the size of the height of these tracks if we want to clear up some real estate on our screen here, depending on what type of screen you are using. So here's all our tracks here. Now, the first thing I like to do is I like to bring my cursor all the way back to the beginning, and I like to zoom in here. Now, we can do this just by left clicking on the timeline and dragging down with our mouse, or if you want to use the shortcuts, which is what I recommend, the W and the E key. E will zoom in, W will zoom out. That's quick, 2 little shortcuts for Studio One. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to zoom in a little bit here. I'm going to make the tracks a little bit larger so we can see them a little bit better. And what I want to do is I want to get all the dead space out of here at the beginning of the song. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to play back the beginning of the song and see kind of what happens here. So we don't all that racket at the beginning, right? Okay, so we want to get rid of that 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. I mean, it's kind of cool, but we want to get rid of that, right? We don't need that there at the beginning of the song. So the way I'm going to zoom in so I can see all of that audio that's kind of quiet, if I come down here in the bottom right-hand corner above the browse button, you'll see this little slider. If I left click and drag it up and down, see how it's not turning up the volume here of the audio, it's just increasing the view of the actual audio waveform. And I like to zoom in all the way so I can see that the 2 guitars here is what picks up in the piano. So everything before this, all this racket, we want to get rid of. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight all these tracks. Now I can just click anywhere in the edit screen and do Command A, which will select everything. And I can just grab one of the tracks and I can just drag this over here like so. And I can put a little bit of a fade here at the top. So when the playhead crosses this audio, it doesn't get any clicks or pops. And let's play that back and see if we got rid of most of that noise. Oh, we want to get rid of all this. Okay, we want to get rid of all that. So I'm going to move this in even further. I'm going to zoom in a little. I'm going to back off on the fade. Now, again, you could do this however you want. You can get as picky or as non-picky as you want to get, but we just want to hear the beginning of the song here, I think. So let's try this. Even that, we hear the 3, 4. We don't want to hear that either. I want to get rid of all of that. And then we can adjust our fade here. And again, the way I did this, as I'll do it again. I'll put the cursor anywhere in the timeline. All the events or all the audio files here have been deselected. I'm going to hold the command key on your Windows. I think it would be the Windows key, and hold down that and hit the letter A, and that's command. That'll select all if you didn't know that. So let's see. Okay, we're almost there. We're almost there. I'm going to do something like this. Yeah, we can still hear that drummer in the beginning. Where are we hearing him here? Let's get rid of all of that. So I'm going to just keep moving it until I get rid of his voice, which is probably right here somewhere. There we go, better. So now I'm going to, oh, it's on deselected. I'm going to zoom. Oops, what did I do here? Undo. Sorry about that. My bad. I'm going to hit Command A. I'm going to select them all. I'm just going to left click and drag them all the way back to the beginning here. All the way back. So let's go all the way. And all I'm doing is just grabbing them with my cursor here, as we can see. And I'm going to bring it all the way back to the beginning. Now let's bring the cursor back. Okay, so there we go. So maybe we'll drag it off a couple of beats there. Okay, good enough. That's, again, you can dial that in as closely as you want. Now we've gotten to the beginning of the song. Now I'm going to go all the way to the end of the song, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to see where it kind of fades out here. I'm going to kind of play back the end of the song here. We'll zoom out here. Let's just see where it fades off. Again, and this is not mixed, obviously. So it looks like we need a fade out, right? So we could see at the end of our tracks here, we have a few tracks that kind of extended, the piano tracks kind of extended more during the recording process. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to deselect here, and I'm just going to highlight these three, holding my shift key and clicking, and I'm just going to pull these in. So everything is about the same length here, okay? They're all ending pretty much at the same time. And I think I want to end it right around there. I want it to kind of fade off after that last vocal. So again, I can do Command A. Oops. Yep, Command A. Oops, sorry, Command A. There we go. And I'm going to fade that out there after that last vocal. So I'm going to pull this in a little bit, and then I'm going to group them, and I'm going to fade everything out. So I'm going to try this. Okay, it's still a little bit long here, so I'm going to back all these fades off. I'm going to pull this in a little bit more. And again, you can get as picky or as non-picky as you want, but you get the idea. And once the mix is done, we can always tweak this, once you get all the volume set, you can kind of tweak it. But that gets you in the ballpark now. So now I'm going to zoom back out. So I got my beginning and my end started. I'm just going to save that. And then I could come down here to this bottom right-hand little slider above the browser button, and you can lower this if you don't want to see everything jammed up all the way like that. You want to see your audio waveforms a little bit differently. So I always do fade ins and fade outs to make sure I get the start and the end of the song kind of where it is. Certain songs will start with a hard stop and a hard start. This kind of fades off, no big deal. The next thing I like to do is I go through, particularly, again, I zoom in on all the audio here, and I look for where it may be appropriate to cut out some of the dead space where things are not being played because of things like headphone bleed. Now, this is huge on something like lead vocals, for example. So if I take this lead vocal track here and I expand it so we can see it quite bigger, like this, and if I zoom out a little bit, okay, let me just close this down a little. So this is the lead vocal track here in yellow. And you can see between phrases, or at the beginning of the song, before he starts singing, in between phrases, this one's not too bad. I'd like to come between phrases and zoom all the way up, and you see all this bleed. This is all going to be headphone bleed into the headphones. So I'd like to solo up this vocal track and listen.
It's true.
Okay, and I try to listen to say, do I need Is that quiet enough? Let me just turn up that lead vocal so we could hear it a little bit better. Do we need to cut that bleed out?
Sometimes late.
It's not too bad. You'll get certain tracks in certain sessions where the headphone bleed is so bad, or the vocalist wasn't isolated and maybe they were singing in a room where there was other instruments kind of playing, and you'd want to go in there and trim all of that out, because what that's going to do as you start to EQ and compress that vocal in the mixing stage, you're going to raise up the volume of that bleed and it can muddy up the mix. So that happens from mix to mix. Sometimes in, like where he's not singing, where there may be a guitar solo or a piano solo, if there was such a thing, like right here, even though all that bleed there, you can see it's not very loud, but let's say it was too loud for you. You could cut this out. I can use the range tool here, where I hit number 2 on my keyboard. You can see my cursor changes to a cross, and I can just left click and drag with my mouse, highlight that section, hit my delete key, and now that's gone. See that? And then I can go back to my cursor tool, which is the number 1, and I can fade out the last line and fade in the first line. And you can do that for the entire vocal track where appropriate. There's going to be places where it makes sense. There's going to be places where it doesn't make sense. It really depends on the track. So what I do first is I listen to the lead vocal track and I get rid of any headphone bleed that I feel we may need if the session needs one, and I cut it up. So here's another section. Let me just show you, for example. I'll come over here. I'm using the range tool on in my DAW, and I'm clicking delete key, highlighting and clicking, and I'm going to show you a little trick too. So, okay, so I cut out 2 places here already. So if I zoom back out, and you can see now, I have 3 chunks of audio here, right? Where I cut everything out. Now, what I recommend you do is once you make all your cuts and you clean everything up, now the way you can make this region or this event one block of audio again with all of your edits there, so you can't inadvertently knock something out of time from left to right, is if you were to highlight, select, hold your shift key, select, select, and then in Studio One, you can hit Command and the letter B for boy. This will bounce, and you'll see now it's glued all the areas back together, but you can see where we took all that headphone bleed out, it's gone now. And now this is one block of audio, which is easier to manage than a bunch of little cuts. So if you have a session where you have many, many cuts in a vocal track, for example, because there was a ton of headphone bleed, you can have this vocal track cut up into 50 different sections. And if one of those little pieces move during the course of you working throughout your session, your vocal's going to be out of time, okay? And it's very easy to do. So by highlighting all the little cuts, hitting Command B for bounce, or you can, if I do make Command Z here and undo, if I do this again, I hit 1, 2, select using my shift key in the mouse, and I right click, I can also come over here to where it says event, and I can say bounce selection. See, Command B is the shortcut. Windows key B would be for PC. Same thing, okay? So again, if you check out the PreSonus Studio One Beginner's Guide that I mentioned during the course, I go through a lot of these different commands and show you the most common ones and how to use them, but that's just one. So I clean up my vocal track. That's the first thing I do, is my lead vocal. Then the second thing I look at are my background vocals, and I do the same thing. So maybe what I do is I will come over here to background vocal 1 and I'll do the same thing. Now I can either just expand this track by dragging it with my mouse, or I can just double click the event and watch this. It opens up big on the bottom screen. If you look down here in the right hand corner where it says edit, that opens and closes that. So you can open and close that. So if I want to work on the vocal track and make it big without just stretching out above, I can do this and I can make this bigger. And I can do it right here. Any edits that I do to that track here will transfer up here. Okay, so here's the background vocal. So let's say I want to, okay, here it is. I want to expand that and I want to get rid of this bleed, let's say. This is not bad, but let's just say we did. Again, with our range tool, I could come over here, hit delete, come over here, hit delete. And again, it really depends on the session whether or not. It's like this, there's no bleed in here. They might have done this already, but let's say there's headphone bleed in here. I'm going to do that. And I'm going to go back to my cursor tool. Now again, I'll close the edit screen. Now again, I have all these little chops, so I'll just select them all. And then we can either right click or use Command B, and we can bounce it to one block of audio. Okay, so I do that on my vocals, I do that on my background vocals. The other place that I'll do a lot of that too is on drums, on tom tracks in particular, where toms are not, you have a lot of drum, this is where you're going to get a lot of bleed from your drum kit. All your microphones on your drum kit are going to bleed into your tom track. Let me change the color of this so we can see it a little bit better here. I'm going to change that to purple just so you can see it better. I'm going to stretch it out here, or again, I could double click and it'll open up really big here, right? But let's just say over here, let's just solo up just the tom track. And I always do this in solo, and I start playing. Okay, so that's the tom being hit, obviously. Right? So that's fine. Nothing to do there. But when we get over here, there's all the bleed from the toms. You can hear the overtone of the tom, and it's resonating and vibrating and ringing. And then he's going to start hitting the toms over here again. So I want to get rid of all this bleed. You can see over here he starts hitting them again. Right there. We don't want to get rid of that, so we want to get rid of all the nonsense in the middle. So if I use my range tool again, come over here and drag from here to here, now it's gone. And I do this on toms an awful lot. So I'll go and listen. That's the last one, right? And then I can see it over here. You can see where the audio spikes up when he hits it again. Highlight this with the range tool, hit the delete key, and now that's gone. Right? And then I come back over and listen. I got to make sure you really go through and listen, because you don't want to inadvertently delete a tom hit that you didn't think was a tom hit. So you got to be careful with this, okay? And you can bring your audio up and down to make it easier. But you can see he's hitting it here. Okay, so I want to be careful about that. I can see this is the last one. These are these tom hits? No. So these are not tom hits. It's the end of the song. Okay, great. So I could just come over here and delete. Okay, go back to my arrow tool. And as I said again, I'm going to zoom out. Now I have all these chunks of audio. We don't need this dead space at the end. If I go like this and highlight and do command, or I'll do right click, go to Event in Studio One, go to Bounce Selection. And there we go. And now all the bleed is silent between the tom hits. So I do this on all the rack toms and all the floor toms. I do this on drums a lot, as opposed to using something like a gate plugin, which I'm not a big fan of. To me, I'd rather take the time to go through and clean up the tracks. And this is what I call this. This is cleaning up the tracks. What this is going to do, especially if you have one tom, two tom, floor toms, you have all that bleed and all that racket going on, even though it's at a low volume on a single track, the accumulative effect of that across 3-4 tracks, and then some headphone bleed on the lead vocal and some headphone bleed on the background vocal, you can have a bunch of tracks that has all this nonsense between where those particular instruments are playing that can muddy up your mix. So take the time and go through and clean up the tracks. Now, I don't do things like cleaning up the tracks between the kick hits, for example. They're too close together in proximity to really do that. So here's our kick. Could you go through and clean all these things up? You could if you wanted to. A kick drum, it depends on. Maybe in the very, very beginning of the song where he's playing a bunch of tom fills and the kick is only coming in only on the 1, on the 2, 3, and 4. It's not. I might clean that up. But once it gets to a regular drum beat here, I won't necessarily clean up and get rid of those snare hits. If I really wanted to do that, if I thought the snare was way too loud, I would not go through manually and cut every snare hit out. That's where I would maybe use something like a gate, or I would use something as in an EQ on the kick drum when we get to doing EQ to kind of pull out some of those higher end frequencies that where the snare is going to bleed through the kick. So I don't typically do it on the kick or the snare. It's typically the toms and the headphone bleed in vocals, usually. If there's any guitar tracks, maybe where electric guitars, where before they start playing, they turn up their amp and you can hear all the amp noise, I might get rid of that. So it's going through each of the tracks, it's listening to each of the tracks, and it's deciding where do you want to clean up your tracks. The more cleaning you do, the more clarity you're going to have with your mixes. For sure. That's a real important step that a lot of people overlook. A lot of mixers overlook the housekeeping portion of doing this. And the reason why they do that is because it takes time. And everybody's in a big rush to start dropping all their new fancy plugins and start twisting knobs and getting down to mixing, that they don't start with a good foundation. Now, every session is going to be a little bit different depending on how the tracks were delivered to you and how they were recorded. Will depend on how much or how less, housekeeping, if you will, or cleaning tracks you'll have to do. But if you spend the time up front and get the session prepped with everything that I showed you in last week's video and this week's video, and clean up your tracks, listen, clean them up, do your fade-ins, your fade-outs, get everything nice. Then when you go to mixing, you start adding EQ and especially compression. You're not going to have a bunch of muddiness happening in your mix. Okay, so I hope you found these last two videos helpful. So if you're new to Studio One, to get your audio into Studio One, to kind of prep the session so you could get ready to mix, and you're starting off with a good foundation. Now again, if you want to learn all the little facets and all the little controls on this screen here, what every little button does, and learn more shortcuts and more tips and more tricks, and get yourself more comfortable with Studio One because you're new, whether you're coming from another DAW or whether you're the first time you've ever looked at Studio One because you just bought your first audio interface and it came with Studio One, then once again, I invite you to go to homerecordingmadeeasy.com, check out the PreSonus Studio One Beginner's Guide. I think it's 14 or 16 videos long, ton of information for the absolute beginner. And if you want to check it out today, I'm going to give you 25% off by using the coupon code YouTube25. Put that in at checkout, 25% off. You can download the course to your computer. You can have it forever. And once you've watched that course, you'll be able to navigate and get yourself around Studio One with no problem. And I go into a lot more detail. So once again, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video. I've been Dave with homerecordingmadeeasy.com, and I will see you in the next video. Take care, everybody.